from Thomas. I felt I needed some curtains, so I went to buy some material from the curtain materials shop or haberdashery. I said to the assistant, a man about my age, about my height, slightly smarter than me, I need some material. He said, what's it for? I said, it's for curtains. He said, well, what are the curtains for? Keep your concentration. I said, well, he said, well, what are the curtains for? I said, they're to keep prying eyes out and warmth in. And he said, anything else? I said, yes, I want them to represent me. I felt myself blushing as I said this. And he said, don't be embarrassed, this is a haberdasher's, we get all sorts in here. He said, how do you want them to represent you? I said, I want them to speak of who I am. He said, what, to say who you are? I said, no, not to say it, but to speak of it. I want something that speaks of who I am, that doesn't shout it, insisting that you hear, but simply states it quietly and lets it hang there in the air. And he said, well, who are you, sir? Curtain material-wise. And I looked at him, or through him, to the far-off place where the truth lies concealed beneath the evergreen bush of indifference, assumptions, distractions, and the fear that nothing will ever come to any good. I looked beneath this bush, noted what I saw, and said, I'm a velvet person. And he said, velvet, sir? Any particular velvet? I said, yes. Crushed velvet. Crushed, but not ultimately defeated. I said, do you have a velvet that's lost a lot of battles but still has a fighting chance in the war? And he said, I believe you may have such a velvet, sir. What colour? And I said, no, but whatever colour, I'd like a shade that's poised between light and dark. That's neither dull nor bright. I'd like a hue that says, hold me, but don't fence me in. I'd like a tone that says, touch me, but respect my right to pull away, perhaps even to shudder. I said, do you have such a colour? He said, I believe so. Any particular pattern? He said, yes, I'd like a pattern, but I'd like a patternless pattern, if you get my meaning. And he said, very good. I said, I'd like a pattern that says, here is someone who's taken a good look, who's looked at life, held it up to the light and said, I see. Who's looked into the dark corners of their own soul and held the gaze of what looked back at them and said, that's me. And he said, I'll just see if we have that in stocking, sir. I said, thanks. And he came back a couple of minutes later with a roll of cloth. And I said, is that it? He said, I'm afraid not, sir. We didn't have any crushed but not defeated velvet with a neither nor colour and a patternless pattern which implies someone who's had a good hard look in stock, sir. I said, oh. He said, we sold the last few metres yesterday to someone from social services. He said, but we do have this pale beige. I said, well, what would it say about me? It would say, here is someone who knew a bargain when he saw one at $2.99 a metre. I wasn't afraid to have people think he was a pervert. So I said, fine, I'll take that one then. So that's how it all worked out.